Well, you guys said that you like these types of videos, so we're back for my second ever monthly reading recap, this time for October 2025. Also, these are not in any particular order here, but this is Gargoyles by Thomas Bernhard. Someone in my book club, Buddy, he's one of our longtime members, has read The Loser and The Woodcutters and was a big fan of those books, highly recommended Bernhard to me. So I went down to my local bookstore last year and I found Gargoyles and Extinction. This month I was looking for something a little bit shorter because I was reading some longer books as well, and I just happened to grab this off the shelf kind of willy-nilly, and I really enjoyed the writing style in the first 25-30 pages, but as the book wore on, I kind of started to feel a little bit lost as to what the point of it was. You could see him trying out some different themes, and I just don't think he fully had a grasp on his style and what he wanted to do just yet with this novel. Would definitely be open to reading more of his books. I'm probably going to read Extinction just because I already have a copy. But by the end of this, I was kind of glad for it to be over. There's basically no breaks in this except for one. So the book is split into two halves. And other than that, there's no paragraph breaks. There's no chapters. That kind of unhalting and unceasing narrative style with the foot on the throttle the whole time and never letting up actually reminded me a lot of Omensetter's Luck by William H. Gass, particularly with the Reverend Ferber character, specifically his stream of consciousness in that book and the long kind of monologues. So it was a lot like that, but just the writing was not quite as strong in my opinion, and part of that probably comes down to this being a translation. So obviously with the original text of Omensetter's Luck, Gass can play a lot with the English language, and if you're an English speaker, especially if it's your first language, it can make a lot of sense to you. Even if an author like Bernhard did stuff like that with German, it might not always translate well, or the translator might not have done a good job. This was translated by Richard and Clara Winston, so I don't actually know too much about them as a translating team, but I would say it felt like it was well translated, but the writing just didn't have the same kind of like fireworks that someone like William H. Gass packs into their books. Basically, it's about a kid who is home from college and he's traveling around with his father, who's a doctor, as the doctor's visiting all the different clients in the Styrian mountain range of Austria and very rural Germany and Austria, and kind of the strange characters that they encounter as he's making these rounds, with the central figure being this prince who has been very isolated in this castle, and effectively his family's all gone mad year after year. Every person that kind of inherits the property starts to lose their mind. And yeah, it's interesting in that way, but sometimes it's a little unclear like what Bernhard was trying to say and what his philosophy was and what his beliefs were. So it didn't fully land for me, but it made me curious about more of his work. In October, I started but did not finish One Day of Life by Manlio and Arguetta, translated by Bill Brow. This was my pick for El Salvador, as I tried to read one book from every country in the world. I thought it was okay the first 25-30 pages, but as I got about 50, 60, 70 pages in, it kind of just lost my interest and I was distracted by some other books. This is considered a classic in Salvadoran literature, and I think it's one of those instances where it was probably politically a very important book. Maybe the writing was just kind of okay-ish, kind of had its acclaim for the former, not the latter. I'll probably go back to it just because it was a very easy read, but the book starts out as effectively a hour by hour retelling of a day, hence the name One Day of Life. But then around like page 40, it just breaks away from that and the story completely shifts, and then it kind of goes back to it. So it was a little weird to me that the structure didn't have that same format throughout, and breaking that format didn't really seem to have a very logical purpose to me. So that kind of put me off as well. But I don't have a whole lot of other books on my radar from El Salvador to read for that country. So if you have any recommendations, please drop them below. Not a country that's necessarily really known for its literary output. I've started, but I'm not finished yet. I'm still going through Poor People by William Vollmann. Vollmann is obviously very well known for his fiction, definitely one of the most prolific writers of this generation. However, he's also quite prolific when it comes to nonfiction as well. And this book is exactly what it sounds like. It's a book about poor people. So Vollmann literally traveled around the world and different places with different levels of poverty and lived amongst poor people and interviewed them and said, hey, like, tell me about your life. Are you happy? How do you view yourself in the context of the global economy? Why do you think you're in the situation you're in? Do you think the situation you're in is bad? Do you think it could be better? And it's very observational. He's not passing any judgment. He's not trying to portray anything in particular. He's literally just documenting how these people are living and how they kind of view themselves. I'm about halfway through. I would say it's a really different type of book because a lot of nonfiction is setting out with an agenda to try to convey a narrative that maybe the author already had or had an inkling towards and then wants to bolster that through the story that they tell, where this is literally much more documentarian. I also read Season of Migration to the North by Tayeb Salih. This is a quite famous work of African literature. He was a Sudanese author, and this was my pick for an author from Sudan as I read around the world. I have pretty mixed feelings about this book. I loved the concept of it, which is it's about a guy from a kind of rural, traditional African village. He goes off to Europe for college, returns, and when he returns, he meets an elder who had a very similar life trajectory, had left Africa to go to Europe to get an education, is now returned to this village. And there's a lot of themes of colonialism in here, racism, and it's kind of about how reversing the roles almost of colonialism, where when this elder went to Europe, he had all these exploits with white women, and but it also kind of demonstrates how he was never really fully able to break free of a lot of the stereotypes that people in Europe had and probably still do have about Africans. So I liked the concept of it. I think there's a lot of really important themes and ideas in here, but I thought that the writing was a little bit too fractured. So it's a non-linear narrative, which I usually really enjoy, but something about the way it was done in this book, it made it very difficult to understand what was going on, what was real and what was imagined. And it wasn't really done in a way that you could easily parse out. Maybe that was part of the intention, but kind of poking around online after I finished this, a lot of people say that despite this being his probably his most well-known work, a lot of people don't think it's actually his best writing. So something to think about if you're looking into picking up works from this author or this region. This month I also read Land at the End of the World by Lobo Antunes. He's a Portuguese author, so this was my pick as I read around the world for Portugal. So that was kind of a little bit of my focus this month, was checking off some countries that I hadn't gotten to yet. This book is fantastic. It's about a doctor in the Portuguese military, and he is participating in the Portuguese and Angolan Civil War. It was a very bloody conflict, and it also has a fractured narrative like Season of Migration to the North, where the doctor is kind of flashing back to life before the war with his wife and his child back in Portugal. And then when he actually gets furloughed and goes home for a bit, then he's like having nightmares about the war and then having to go back. The writing is very strong. Antunes has been compared to like a Faulkner. And when I made a post about this book on Instagram and TikTok, it got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments from people from Portugal saying this guy deserves a Nobel Prize. It's considered like a disgrace in our country that he hasn't been given the Nobel Prize yet because he's so fantastic. So after reading this, I'm definitely interested in reading more from him. And the book that took up the majority of my reading time in October and that is Europe Central by William T. Vollmann. This came out in 2005. He won the National Book Award for this, and we read it for a book club in the month of October. I'm not going to say too much about it because Andy and I will probably do a full podcast episode about it. But yeah, I can definitely see why this is such a highly acclaimed book. The research that went into it, I mean, it is a work of fiction, but it is so historically accurate. It's easy to say this book is about World War II, but it's not really. I mean, that's definitely a big part of it, but it's really much more about kind of a few select people that lived through the war and beyond, and kind of how the war impacted their lives. Especially reading this as an American, it was a unique experience because so much of what we learn about World War II here in our education system is very American-centric, obviously. It's kind of like Hitler was this bad guy. We showed up and punched the Nazis in the face and saved the day. But the war was going on for years before we joined it, and there was a colossal battle between the Soviets and the Germans, and a lot of just kind of like everyday people got wrapped up in that and caught up in that and were worse off for it. So this tells a lot of the stories of the Russian and German civilian perspective, which is really cool. If I had to pick my favorite from the month, it's a toss-up between Land at the End of the World and Europe Central. I will say that I was super impressed by just the prose in this book, but also I was very caught up in reading this. It's a very readable book despite its length, and I'm just in awe of the amount of work, legwork, and research that Vollmann put in. So it's tough to pick. They're vastly different books, but anyway, let me know what you read this month, including your favorite for the month. If you're watching this channel, presumably we have somewhat similar interests in reading, so be curious to see what you guys would recommend.